Welcome to e-commerce exchange from Eastside Co. Today we're going to be talking about the importance of creative in e-commerce and why it's important to online brands. Leading our discussion we have our head of creative Andy Rouse.
Hello there, Matt.
And our marketing director Louis Thompson. Welcome.
Yeah, one of the things we're trying to do is build off on top of the data and algorithm approach. And I think within our kind of industry there's a perception that the kind of data and the algorithms are the answer to everything. And with kind of creative, we kind of challenge that because, in our eyes, it's not. The data is really good at serving up the work we do and making sure we get it in front of people. The creative job kind of picks up from there, and creative kind of forms a kind of two-way conversation with the person at the other end of the screen.
I suppose we look at that stuff, but it still feels quite sterile. We think of it as, we look at interest and behaviour, but we look at it, it doesn't feel like we're looking at a person. It just feels like we're looking...
Data.
It's this kind of group of people like X, Y, and Z. Yeah. We used to do it through user profiling before the data was available. You'd create this fictional person, which I always hated, and I suppose we just did a different version of it now.
I mean, to be honest, that's not something I miss.
No, it's always felt horrible to me because I could never fit myself into one of those boxes.
I think one of the interesting things about social media is for us, for that audience data, if you like, that audience understanding, we can actually use social media to go and get it. We can actually just go and talk directly to people. Yeah. And we've done it recently on one of our clients where we needed to understand their customers better. So we just reached out to them on social media and got all kinds of different responses. And as a result, built a little kind of profile and understanding. We just looked into their desires, their kind of motivations. But I think that two-way conversation between the brand with the website in the middle or the social media in the middle and the person is really important, and we kind of really want to focus in on that as a kind of creative team and make sure we can produce content that actually engages them.
One of the challenges we have certainly with the social media age and the speed at which content is produced, is that historically, if you wanted to produce an ad or a video, you'd be talking kind of small independent film level budgets, or in the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds to produce broadcast quality. So I suppose there's still a thing with clients where they immediately think, I'm not going to do that because I know it's going to cost me hundreds of thousands of pounds, and I need to know before what I'm going to get back from that.
Yeah, and I think you don't. I don't think you use social media that definitively. I think you can spend a lot less and test work. You can get an understanding. I think there's two sides to this coin, basically. The one side is the marketing side, which we ensure that the work is served up, and the other side of the coin is the creative side, which is a little harder to define and sometimes to justify. But it's that side of the coin that I think, unfortunately, is missing quite often out there in the world, and I think it results in kind of platforms being full of quite poor communication. And I think you touched on it a little bit there, that because of the speed and the readiness of social media platforms, that almost like the content, the actual creative, the asset can be a last thought, almost like a last minute thought quite often, and brands will know they need to put something out. I think I always find it quite interesting when in the run up to Black Friday, how often we'll get a request for some sort of asset very close to Black Friday, and you've known when it was all year round. If we'd actually stopped and thought about this in February, we could have done something with much more impact. And therefore you spend all that work you do and all that money you spend and all that traffic you might get through to your site would be much greater as a result.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think it's. I've certainly been guilty of it. It's like, there's so much to, certainly from the agency perspective, there's so much to produce on a monthly basis. We might be working with 10 or 15 clients, and if we're doing social media for all of those, it's 10 or 15 times 30 pieces of content per month for each person, and then you have to distribute that across various channels. So you're potentially talking hundreds, if not thousands, of pieces of content on a monthly basis. So you can get into that flow where you're just thinking, where do we get the next piece of content from? And often you
hand to mouth, kind of.
Yeah, exactly. And often you're producing lots of copy, and then you go, well, we need to find an image for this. And you can get into that area where it's like, we just need to produce something very quickly. And
it's understandable. And I think even if we do content to its best potential, you'll still have elements of that. Yeah. We'll never totally remove that. You know, something might happen, there might be something in the news. Maybe it's a particular item of a product just suddenly sells really well. So you think, all right, well, let's get on top of this. You know, maybe you'll have something that's featured in TV shows, something like that. You didn't see it coming. Creative especially, and creative content is done at the best is when time is spent on it, when there is the thinking time up front. What we would say to our clients is that let's work the year ahead. Yeah. Let's look at the big events, the big things that are going to happen throughout your year, whether that be like a product launch or a seasonal activity. And when we take the time to think from the very start, we can produce a larger range of content and create a plan that could exist over 30 days, maybe up to 3 months, so that we might know in February what is going to go out at the start of autumn, winter, for instance. And when I've worked with fashion brands in the past, we tended to work a few seasons ahead. Yeah. So we'd know what spring, summer is going to be next year already. And not only do we know what it's going to be, but all the content will be created, and we'll have a plan of action for when it's going to be rolled out. And what that means is when we create an asset, we make sure we get the absolute best out of it. We use it to its fullest potential. Yeah. That might be that we shoot a little bit of film content. Mm-hmm. You know, I guess in the traditional media world, that film itself might be it. You know, that might be the thing all wrapped up. Whereas what we would do is, you know, we'd create a teaser element. We'd let people know the film's coming. We'd create cuts of the film. We'd launch the film. When we say launch a film, it's not just one launch. It happens on every social media platform. It happens on their website. There'll be a blog launch. We might PR that as well. Then we'd create cuts of it. You know, we'd fit that film into Instagram stories, for instance. So we'd keep that conversation rolling. And yeah, there's a spend up front, but there's one hell of a benefit much later on. Yeah. That is far greater and far more powerful than if we kind of work to demand so close to kind of deadlines, I guess.
So do you think there's an element of perhaps people not understanding, they see something on Instagram or elsewhere on an advert, and they see the end result, but perhaps don't appreciate the time that has to go into getting to that point?
I think perhaps people don't appreciate the time for effective work. Mm-hmm. I think some people will post just because it's there, in which case, so if you're going to put a post out for Black Friday just because it exists, you're not actually that bothered about it, then you don't really need to be planning a big piece of content for it because it's just not that important to you. But if you're having a significant event in the year and you haven't invested that time up front, you are not doing yourself justice, and you're not giving yourself the biggest chance to attract people into the site. And I often kind of think of creative as a bit like speed dating, where you've got seconds at best to capture someone's imagination and capture their attention in a feed. So it's really important that you get the point across, but it's also really important that you do something that's kind of entertaining. You do that by thinking about what is going to engage very quickly, and you do that by thinking about your audience and what they might like, you know, what sort of stuff they might respond to.
You posted on LinkedIn, or you shared on LinkedIn the other day, I think, or you commented on something. It was Gymshark's Black Friday.
Yeah, Black Friday, yeah.
And they did this concept where it was, you know, still very Gymshark. It's lots of athletes in a room, but trying to replicate that Black Friday manic frenzy, everyone fighting over, you know, a TV in Tesco's. But just, again, very, very simple studio setting, all the clothing set out, and then, you know, I assume they just said to the guys, just go wild and grab what you can and kind of scuffle with each other. And, you know, it's that kind of interrupting people's expectations, I suppose, because people do have an expectation and they have a learned behaviour now of what they should do when they hit a social media platform or any platform. And there's this natural behaviour just to scroll through. And unless something really interrupts you, and you can't be, you know, you really have to depend on the creative or the messaging. You can't depend on sound because it's rarely on. Yeah. Can't depend on
small copy within the post. It's
yeah,
not,
that's, you know, that's I think important, but it's secondary because it's the thing that you go into
It's
after
once you've
your
got the
call.
attention.
Exactly. So you really have to be dependent on that initial.
I think I mean, totally, and that was a really interesting example I thought from Gymshark, and I think another really good example was Nike's activity during the Women's World Cup earlier this year. If you looked at their Instagram stories especially, it was filled every day with like broadcast level work. Really impressive stuff, as well as following the development of the tournament itself and what was happening in it and the themes that were coming, from that. But it was really interesting that for me that Nike used Instagram in that manner for things that maybe traditionally would have gone out on TV platforms, but they used it every single day. That wasn't made on the day. There was a big plan of activity put together. They knew what they were going to do, and they've invested a lot of money into it. Yeah. So they obviously identified Instagram stories as an important place for their kind of customers and audience during that campaign. Yeah. And I think that just shows you how the digital communication is changing. Creative content isn't less than traditional media. It isn't more than. It just depends on every single situation.
I think that comes down to this illusion that suddenly you have to change the principles of what you're doing because the platform has changed.
The platform's not the point, is it?
No, absolutely not. It's, we've spoken about this a lot, but if you go back to the golden age of advertising, where you're buying a full-page spread, or you're buying a segment on the radio, or later on you're buying a TV segment, or you're buying a Super Bowl ad. You're buying those because that's where people's attention was. Yeah. It was in a magazine. It was listening to the radio. It was watching the television.
The truth is, you're not buying that spot. You're buying that person's time.
Exactly. Yeah, that's it. You're just going where the attention is. And there's lots of people. This isn't even a particularly new concept in digital, I don't think, because there are people out there talking about it. But I think it's a massively misunderstood concept.
It's something. I think it's certainly something that's become kind of lost in the kind of fog and euphoria of social media as an opportunity. What social media has done is it's created so many new opportunities to communicate with people, so many new platforms, and I think what happens over time is the platform becomes the point, but that's wrong. It's not. The platform's the opportunity, and it's a great opportunity. The point is to create something that you're buying that person's time still. You put something paid out on Instagram, you're not buying some time on Instagram, you're buying that person's time.
Exactly, yeah.
And I think that's the thing that kind of has got a bit lost in the fog, and what it's resulted in is a lot of work is going out there that I think could be a lot better. Yeah. And it's there almost because the opportunity is there on Instagram, not because the opportunity is there with the person at the other end of the screen.
Yeah. I think that's right. I think this has been, since Facebook launched business pages, it's been people felt like they were obliged to be on that platform, not because that's where their audience was, or not because that was the most efficient way to communicate, but everyone else is on it, therefore we need to have that page. And it became part of standard setup for anyone running a business. Have you got a website? Have you got an Instagram page? Have you got a Facebook page? Have you got a Twitter page? All of those things just became standard, but they weren't necessarily thought about in terms of what should we be doing. What is the best way to communicate on that platform? But also, is that where our users' attention is? Yeah. If we're going to buy that user's attention for a period of time, are we wasting money? You would attempt not to make a bad TV ad because it's going to cost you a lot of money, right? Yeah. But with Instagram and any social media platform, people seem to think of it differently because it's like, well, I can pull a stock image from there.
I think it's the quickness and the readiness of it, and I think it's almost driven some of the way the communication is actually formed.
I think that's led to the lack of preparation and
the lack of quality communication as a result. I think that's a mistake, and I think it's almost like and it's nice to see things like the Nike stuff and the Gymshark stuff, because it shows that they're not thinking like that. Yeah. And they're huge brands, you know what I mean? I think another really interesting example was New York Public Library, who have kind of slowly over time been releasing their kind of notable collection through Instagram stories. Right. And you can actually sit there on the bus and tap and hold and read a whole chapter of a Charles Dickens novel, for instance. But not only that, they've kind of created unique illustrations and animations. They've brought it to life for like the new era. New York Public Library is not, it's not a transactional site, but it's very significant work because traditionally the New York Public Library was for the public of New York.
Yeah.
Through doing that activity on Instagram, that's now a library for the world.
Yeah.
And there's a big, they've put a lot of time and a lot of thought into it, and the results are just incredible.
But this really proves the point that we really should be platform agnostic. It's just about where people's attention was. Because if you go, you know, we talk about the golden age of advertising, but actually when Dickens' work was first released, it was serialized in newspapers. Yeah. It's exactly the same. It is absolutely no different. Yeah. It's just that instead of making a particular newspaper a destination for people who wanted to read the next chapter of the Dickens novel, it's like, I need to get onto New York Public Library's Insta to see what they've done next, you know, to see what they've done next. They released a new chapter, what the illustrations look like. It's exactly the same thing. It's serialization of a novel.
For the right age.
Exactly, yeah. And it's just introducing it to...
And I think like, it's really good to see that, because I think like for me, like over the time I've had ups and downs with the word content. I think it's a really interesting word. I think it's kind of the best and the worst of the industry in a way, because in the worst sense it has driven this kind of idea that things can be last minute and you don't have to think about it and just do something, which is a shame. But it's also the best because it has all of these opportunities. It has the opportunity for New York Public Library to become the world's public library. You know, everyone, you know, bar a few outlying countries, has access to Instagram, therefore they have access to the New York Public Library.
It's all about perception of content rather than what content is. Because it's such a broad, you know, if I say content to BBC Radio, it means a radio show, maybe a podcast. If I say it to a novelist, it might mean a blog or a serialization. If I say it to you know, me as a marketer, it can mean all of those things put together. You know, so it's really interesting, and I think that's part of the issue with it, is that it is so broad that it can mean lots of different things to lots of different people.
And I think that's why our plans are so important. So when we're putting together like a concept, in its biggest sense, what we would do is we'd go away, we'd think of a series of ideas that we can use to engage a brand's audience, to start the sales process, because that's what it's about for us as well. It's not just about the conversation, it is about starting that sales journey. And we can build a plan, we can say, well, this is the message, this is what we want to get across, this is all the things we want to land in the customer's mind. So what could we do to do that? We might take that one bit of content, make it into 10 bits of content, 100 if we can. We might have a long-form written version of that content. We might have a podcast version of that content. We might have a filmed version of that content. We might have just photography. And when we do that, and when we plot it out, what I would say is a relatively small, compared to traditional ad spend, for a relatively small budget, you can do a lot of work on digital, and you can constantly drive. And for me, this is where it's really interesting for Eastside Core, because we can bolster the marketing side of it on top of the traditional e-commerce stuff, but we've already got the marketing side, but then we can bolster the creative on top of that. Because e-commerce is seeping out of the store, it's seeping out of the traditional website, it's no longer a contained kind of space. And
it's just an extension of what has happened with bricks and mortar. You know, bricks and mortar seeps outside of that into e-commerce. E-commerce will inevitably seep outside of that into other platforms. And that will, you know, it's actually starting to go a little bit full circle now. People who are starting on e-commerce and then creating a physical space after the fact, because they know they've got an audience in a specific location.
Rather than being tied to a constant retail.
Exactly. So, you know, it just proves that all of those different, you know, if you view a bricks and mortar store as a platform, there is still a space for that. There's still a space for an e-commerce website. There's still a space for directly selling through social. All of those places still exist. It's just, do you have audience attention within those platforms?
And I think, do you have a good enough understanding of what you need to say? And that's what when we do the planning, we go through the brand sessions, we work out what the right thing to say is, and you know, for me, I've got this kind of phrase in my mind, kind of why whisper when you can shout? And I think in the past, at times that was relevant. I think it's becoming way more relevant now in digital communication because too many people are whispering. They're putting content out there, and like I say, it might be that the really important message is in that copy, in the body copy of the post. Well, the chances of someone reading that if they're not engaged in the image is pretty slim. So for me, like, if you want someone to know you're a sustainable fashion business, for God's sake, shout it. Yeah. Shout sustainability. Go on and on about sustainability. And there's an old phrase in kind of advertising as well. Like, if you want someone to think something, say it once, say it twice, say it thrice. You know, land it basically. Yeah. And I think that is missing from a lot of digital communication, where it's just too whispery.
I think part of that comes from you always get these peaks and flows, right? You get a new generation of people or advertisers or a new generation of platforms, and people want change. They want the opposite of what happened before. So, you know, it always used to be who's got the biggest ad space, you know, who is most regularly on the radio, who is most regularly showing TV ads. And, you know, for a period of time, certainly in the States, it was about the very hard sell. You know, sales letters, very, very much telling people that they need to go and buy X, Y, and Z. And I think during the kind of social media, digital revolution, the whole thing tried to go in the opposite direction. So people did do that in the beginning, and then brands wanted to go in the opposite direction and say, actually, I want to become the destination, and the product is good, the brand is good, the customer service is good, people will come to me, therefore I'm going to be quite quiet about it. And I think there's probably a balance between a hard sell, questionable claims, and, you know, nothing. There's somewhere in between that where the messaging is good.
I think it for me, it doesn't have to be, it's not necessarily a hard sell. I think it's a kind of a direct approach. You know, it's you could do this, or you could land a certain theme through a campaign, build up your audience, attract loads of followers, get loads of comments and everything, and then soften it off because you've landed it in people's mind, and then maybe once a year you come back to it just to reinforce it in people's mind. And I think social media is a difficult place to do a really hard sell. There's lots of kind of opportunities to lead to the sale, but it's also a place where people are going to be entertained, to be connected, and they're not necessarily in the frame of mind of, you know, an old washing machine ad. You know, it's and you've got to, I think you've got to enter into that media space as well. You've got to understand that if you can go away and create media, film, images that people find entertaining, I think you've got a chance of capturing their attention because they're in that frame of mind. And there is the idea of being disruptive. I don't think you should be in social media. You should be disruptive by going in with the wrong tone. I think you should be disruptive by going in with content that actually gets noticed. The key thing for me, the key thing I say to any brand is factor in time to think about it. So let's step back, think about, even if it was just put ourselves a month back, ideally more than that, but put ourselves a month back, think about what we want to do, think about the way to communicate it, how we say it, how we engage people. Then we create the content, work out how we go across all the digital platforms and opportunities, and then we create as much content from that as we possibly can, knowing that the message is always going to be right.
So it's clear that the planning and the strategy is really important to getting your creative right and getting the messaging out there. How do you think the more reactive stuff fits in with that, with the overall picture?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is where we work with marketing really well as well. The reactive, daily, there will still be a need for something that hasn't been planned, that will never disappear, nor should you try and make it disappear, because if you do that, you're missing out on opportunities. What you've got as a platform, you've got something you can refer back to that says, how should we respond to that? Or if we want to do something based on a particular theme, well, what should we do to fit in with that whole message and platform? So it's kind of like you've got your guiding light, if you know what I mean. You've got that thing there to guide you. You don't have to just panic something out and hope for the best. You know you can create something on top of what you've already done that fits in with it and builds on it. And equally, you know, as people respond and chat to you and give you feedback, you can feed that back into the work. You can say, actually, this particular thing really landed with people. We got a lot of returns off it. Yeah, we got a lot. Maybe we've got a lot of links through to the site, to the sale, or maybe we've got a lot of responses. Therefore, we can look back at the work we've done and say, okay, how can we engineer a bit more of that back into it? What could we do? Could it just be in the copy of the post? Could we change some of the supers or change an image or something like that to just feed a bit more of that back in? But the important thing is that because you have that plan, you have an understanding. Another thing I'd say is reactive isn't always reactive. It's actually pretty well planned.
Like the Nike stuff you're referring to?
Yeah, but I think, you know, I think what the funniest example for me, when Uber went through their court case about being able to operate in London, and the result of that was that they couldn't, within seconds of that, Addison Lee had tweeted them, "You okay, hun?" Which I thought was just a great bit of marketing. It raised Addison Lee's profile massively. It entered them into a conversation that they needed to be in.
Is that a rival taxi firm?
Yeah, so they're a private hire taxi firm, yeah. They see Uber as a real challenge to their business, you know, so for them it was an opportunity to get one back on them.
So do you think that was a pre-planned?
Of course it's pre-planned, yeah, of course it was, yeah. I think you've got that time to think what events might happen, what may people say, what may people do. You know, if you're a sports company and there's a major sporting event like a World Cup final or something like that, one team's going to win and one team's going to lose, you can pre-plan that response. You can have something ready. Yeah. You've just got to do that thing in time. That's why if you do that thinking out, you can look at all the events that are going to happen during this time and think, what would we do in the eventuality of that event, you know?
I think even like taking, you know, pre-planned responses out of it. I think if you produce content in the way that we're proposing, i.e. you've got, you know, a lot of what we're doing at the moment, a lot of what Andy's doing is producing almost pillars that you can draw from.
Exactly.
So, you know, there might be 4 or 5 different pillars across a client, and you produce these pillar pieces of content or manifesto pieces, which might be, you know, 2-3 days worth of work, whether that's shooting or recording podcasts or writing blogs, whatever that is, a whole range of content, is that if you produce enough of that in a short period of time, there are inevitably pieces that you can kind of bend and mold to specific situations. So, you know, a perfect response to a situation could just be a gif of someone making a face.
Yeah.
You know, it could be anything, and that could just be a very small snippet of a video of just a little reaction that you've caught on a video that fits a situation.
Or you saying this could be a 30-second snippet promoting this podcast?
Exactly. See what I did there?
I think it's Lewis has touched on it because we probably didn't cover it there. But when we create the plan, generally what we'll do for brand is we'll say, right, you have X amount of pillars that we could talk about your brand. Sometimes that's just one. Sometimes it may be 10. You know, it just depends on the brand. And what we'd say to our kind of marketing teams and the creative teams is, whenever we produce a piece of communication, it should come from one of those pillars. Anything outside of that may not be relevant to our audience. We can add to pillars, obviously, it's not a fixed thing, it may change. We may find that there are things that people are responding to, therefore we should have it in. But that's part of the guiding light principle. So if you need to talk about an event or you need to get something out, look back at your pillars and say, okay, which pillar does this sit in?
Because that then guarantees consistency of the message as well, doesn't it?
Yeah. And also, on top of that, the last kind of thing I guess I'd say to it all is that when you've developed it in advance, you also develop a look and feel. You develop a kind of lock-up, you develop a colour palette. You get that visual language of the whole campaign or the brand, right? So that you know if you need to produce something quite quickly, you know what that language is, you know what that tone of voice is. So you're not kind of panicking around Shutterstock to find a relevant image, or you're not thinking, well, what font should it be? What colour should it be? You've got that in your platform as well. And again, through the pillars, that look and feel may change. You know, one brand might have a heritage pillar versus an NPD pillar, which might be quite different.
What does that mean?
So new product development. So it might be that someone has had a product out there for hundreds of years and everyone knows and loves it and it's never going to change, but they also might have like a new advanced product. So again, that might have a slightly different language, visual language going on and tone of voice. But again, because you've got the pillars, you can pre-plan that.
It's good.
I think that's it.
Yeah,
I
that's
think
a
we're
good
there.
point at which to finish. Yeah. Hope you enjoyed that episode of E-commerce Exchange. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, put any comments down below about what you thought about the episode, what you'd like to see next time, and we'll see you next time for the next episode.